Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? There we are. Is that better? That's odd. Hang on a minute. Don't go away. We always have to have some kind of technical problem or else it's not the Stratosphere Lounge. Hang on 1 second. Oh, here's the problem right here. Hang on, my chair at my headphones. Just wouldn't be the Stratosphere Lounge without starting with some kind of catastrophic technical failure that even the most primitive societies on Earth can probably figure out a way to avoid. But anyway, here we are. It's the Stratosphere Lounge, episode 15, subtitled "My Chair Ate My Headphone Feed." Good to see everybody again. Might be a little bit shorter this week. I got a stack of work to do. And, you know, every time I open up the comments, I feel like I open them up just a little bit shorter and for a little shorter period of time. But the fact is, the questions just get more and more questions, and we get better and better questions. I just don't know where to start with these things. They're really just really terrific. So I hope everybody's been doing well. Been a little tired this week. I had a lot of work to do. I got a lot of work to do tonight when it's done. So rather than postpone it, which I've already done way too much of, I just thought maybe we could get through it and maybe do an hour, maybe hour 15, something like that. I've got something I have to record, one of those scribing videos for Declaration Entertainment, you know, the ones where they draw in the pictures. So it's been a pleasure to narrate those. I don't write those, and those are done for a different client. They're done for various ebook clients, but I like narrating them, and so I've got some of that to do, and then I've got a big script I have to finish tonight before I can leave, so I got a lot of work to do today. And as Brendan pointed out there, it's always nice to start the Stratosphere Lounge out with a empty chair joke in honor of our great president, who I went off on in trifecta yesterday. And honestly, that was the toned down version. What you know, I don't even really get too much into this, honestly. But you know, my previous level of outrage was watching him with an open mic give away our missile defense shield, the ability to defend the United States against rogue missile attack. We'll just hand that to the Russians in exchange for them being quiet, not embarrassing him, so that he can get reelected. And then, just when I thought that was the upper limit of what I could tolerate, then we find out that no, we're actually going to give up something a lot more precious than a missile defense shield. We're going to give up the First Amendment. We're going to give up the one idea that powers this country, and that is the idea that you can speak your mind without consequences. We'll give that up in order to make sure that there's no more, embarrassing uprisings in the Middle East, which may affect his chances of being reelected, because as we all know from the Russian microphone incident, once he's reelected and he doesn't have to face the voters anymore, then he'll have a lot more flexibility. It's an amazing world we live in here. You know, I don't know if it's the same for you guys. I know it's the same for you guys. There are days when you just simply don't know how you're gonna get through the day. You don't know how you're gonna face the consequences of what possibly might happen here. You know, when I say possibly, I don't mean that he might get reelected, because he might get reelected. But if he does get reelected, how much of these, doomsday scenarios that come to mind are really true? How many of them are just, kind of worry about the worst case scenario? How far is the worst case scenario? Is there going to be something worse than our own imaginable worst case scenario? But when I see a guy getting hauled into a car at midnight with 12 or 15 law enforcement officers around him, his head wrapped in a towel and wearing sunglasses so he's not recognized, because if he's recognized, he'll be killed, because he made a movie that certain people are either on the other side of the world find offensive to them and hurts their feelings. I notice their feelings get hurt quite a lot over there. My feelings get hurt every day. My feelings get hurt by the hour in this business. And we'll just give up our First Amendment for that. So that's the kind of week I've had. So I'm not in my very, very most cheerful mood today, but hopefully we'll get a couple of these questions under our belt and we'll get a little lubricated, a little launched, as they used to say, and see what we can do. So how about if we just get started again? Episode 15. Who'd have thunk it? Good to see you. Okay. We try and do these more or less in order. So I just saw a comment there on how do you get a question on this thing. You go to the Facebook page, the Bill Whittle Facebook page, and I open the comments sections on Wednesday afternoon, a couple hours, right around 2 or 3, somewhere in there, and open up the comments section for about an hour and a half, 2 hours tops. And in the 2 hours I did that today, I think I had 85 questions. There's needless to say I can't take all of them. And needless to say, I hope you're not offended if I don't take yours. And especially, and I mean this really sincerely, I especially hope that you're okay with the fact that I may have passed over your questions many, many times. I select them on the basis of things that, number one, I think is it something I think is going to be interesting, something I can talk about? Is it something different than what I've talked about last week or a couple shows ago and stuff? And sometimes they're just things that I just don't feel like talking about today. But we'll get through as many as we can. So let's start with Jared Bryant, who says, for those of us with an urgent, restless penchant for debating political topics but who've been utterly failed by the public school system and or liberal universities, do you have any hints or tips for going about the daunting, overwhelming task of re-educating ourselves in economics, government, and history so that we may gain the confidence to tackle these most important issues? All of that to say his final question, final sentence, which was my favorite. How did you build your knowledge for punditry? Well, I majored in punditry at the Punditry Academy of Florida, where I received a degree in advanced punditry, and then I went on to get my PhD in pundimetrics. Most of you probably know by now that I was a theater department major at the University of Florida. It's not exactly prime education for punditry, but it is a prime education for delivering the message in terms of the video work I do. So that's when I first learned some basics about just stagecraft, what we often call stagecraft, how to present something, how to present something theatrically, knowing what a good theatrical setup was. My public speaking, to whatever skill I have with that, started much, much earlier in the Miami Planetarium. When I was 13 or 14, I was doing live star lectures. I mentioned this before too. Talking live to 325 people in a dark room and pointing over here, we can see the constellation Scorpius the Scorpion. You can see the two claws here. Here is Antares, which means rival of Mars. And I used to mix it up and try to make it a lot funnier, especially for the kids groups in the morning. I started that very young, so I've never had a problem public speaking. But the punditry thing, the educational base for punditry, I did pretty much all of my thinking and synthesizing on my own. I mentioned, I think maybe last week or 2 weeks ago, that somebody said to me real early in the eject, man, you're obviously a big student of Ayn Rand, and I'd never read her, and I didn't want to read her. I purposely put off reading her for almost 10 years, specifically because I didn't want to be derivative. But let's not talk so much about individual authors and things, but big issues like economics, government, and history. I can't stress enough, I'm sure most of you who've seen enough of these things can tell without me telling you, but I can't stress enough how important history is for the work that I do. Because politics, I have no idea what a degree in political science means. I honestly don't know what it means, and I don't know how you get the degree. I do know that when you look at history or politics or the behaviors of people, scientifically, trying to get some kind of handle on how people will behave, you've got a system that's so chaotic that it's virtually prediction proof. The only thing you have is the wake, right? You have the wake of a ship, and if the wake extends to the south, then chances are the ship is heading north. You really just have the wake, and the wake changes, and you can look back and see course corrections, a turn to the left, turn to the right, all these other things. So history is everything, really, for me. And one of the things you learn as you start to get into history, that this affects you from this progressive viewpoint, is you do begin to see the cyclical nature of history. You begin to realize that people were saying things in ancient Rome virtually identical to what we're saying now, and at the same sort of place in the curve, on the civilizational curve. That is a sobering realization and a humbling one, and it's good to be humbled and sobered in this way. It's really, really essential, I think. And I think that many, many progressives would start to rethink not even their policy so much as their self-image, if it became clear to them that they are not the first people to have these ideas. Isn't that the thing about youth, especially your teenage years, right? Isn't that the thing about being a teenager? You go to college. I was certainly this way. You go to college, and when you're in college, you realize that your stupid parents and your stupid teachers, and no one's ever been as idealistic as we are, and no one's ever been as committed to the truth as we are, because we've actually realized that there's different things going on than what we were told as kids growing up. So we are going to change the world because for the first time ever, young people are going to become placed in positions of power, and then they're going to live up to their ideals and not be corrupted by the corrupting forces of the world. I bet you every single generation in history has had that exact same thought. I bet you this is stealing a phrase from a source book on the movie Aliens, a really neat kind of a sci-fi book about gear and aliens, and it was written in the form of like a lot of testimonials from soldiers, and I just wanted to give it credit because it's not my line. I thought it was a great line. But, there's no doubt that a flinty old Israelite sergeant, talking about these newfangled horns that Jericho is going to be brought down with. Back in my day, we used flint spearheads, and, they were good enough work for us. These new bronze spearheads, wait till they get tested under combat experience. This whole idea of progressivism is that we're new. We're the first people to be this decent and this moral and this advanced and this intellectual and this perceptive and this understanding and this blah, 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 nonsense. All been done before. Cowardice has been done before. Heroism's been done before. Standing up to tyrants has been tried, and not standing up to them has been tried. Fighting sooner rather than later has been tried. Putting fighting off until the last minute's been tried. Being too aggressive with a civilized enemy has been tried. Overextending an empire has been tried. Underextending an empire to the degree that you're isolationist. All this stuff has been tried. And since you cannot predict the future with humans, since you can't run experiments on them, and well, not legally, you don't have the option to create experimental tests to get information about what might happen in the future. All you can do is look in the past, and it's a big book. It's a big book of history. When you look into the past, you can look for models and examples of the situation that most closely match where we are today, and hope that they can teach you something. So history, I would say, is very, very, very big part of my punditry base, the big part of my punditry base. It doesn't hurt me that I started out as a lot more liberal, the most valuable thing about that is, number one, I understand how the mindset works, and more particularly, I understand how the mindset doesn't work. It's the kind of thing that makes liberals crazy to say it. And I suppose it's possible that it works the other way around, but I bet you the number of people that convert this way are 99 to 1. Where I've said this 100 times, when I was a liberal, I passionately believed in things I knew nothing about. I knew nothing about. I didn't have any sense of history. I didn't have any sense of politics, but I had very strong opinions, and I was utterly convinced I was right, utterly convinced that the people who were opposing me were either old or crazy. And so when you fundamentally change, and I have to say again, because I can't ever talk about being a liberal without cutting myself some slack, I was a pro-military, pro-business, pro-American liberal who felt that if somebody broke into my window one night, came through my window and stole my TV set, well, that was okay because they're disadvantaged, and I'm going to go off to the world, and I'm going to be a big success, and I can afford more TVs, but maybe that's the only TV that guy could afford for his family, and I really believed that. And then somebody did break in my window and try to take my TV set. They were 6 inches away from where I was sleeping, and suddenly realized, that guy may have had a weapon, and if I'd woken up more suddenly, he may have used that weapon and taken my one young life for the TV set. And the real realization, of course, was that he's not going to take that TV set home to feed for his starving family who is reduced to sock puppetry and casting, shadows on the wall by candlelight for entertainment. He's going to take the TV set and he's going to sell it for $20 and get a $20 hit of crack, and that'll last for an hour or two or three, and then boom. And that's what's going to cost me the TV set, which wasn't even my TV set when you get right down to it. It was my dad's TV set because he paid for it. So now I'm out of TV set. And he doesn't have a TV set. He's hawked it for 1/10 of its value or whatever, and he's got a transitory high, and now we're both out of TV sets. So that's part of growing up. Part of growing up is also the understanding that going from liberal to conservative is you begin to understand the inertia of the world. And the inertia of the world in terms of we're going to go out and change the world and we're going to have this idea and this idea and this idea and this idea, and then you find out you can't get the money for it, or there's a problem with the distribution. There's some other fundamental flaw with this idea, and the reason that it hasn't been done before is because of this fundamental flaw. Now, some people are defeated by this. Other people take it in stride and realize, rather than giving up, they realize this is a much more complex issue than I originally thought. It's not as easy as it looks. And if you really are on fire to change the world, you begin to realize that you're going to have to spend enormously more effort overcoming the obstacles than you did on coming up with the idea, which is the easy part. And then also that no matter how successful you are at overcoming the obstacles, you cannot stop the Nimitz. When the Nimitz is at full power and it's cruising at 35 knots or whatever that top speed is, and let's say that you manage to get to the control room of the Nimitz, and let's say that you go through all of the hurdles necessary to actually get to that position, and you throw that baby into full speed astern, that doesn't mean that the Nimitz just stops. It means that the Nimitz begins to perceptibly slow down, and it takes miles and miles and miles to stop that ship, and then you got to back it up again to build up more. It's not easy. A lot of people, like I say, get disappointed by this. This is why people become conservative over time, because it's the oldest saw in the book, but a conservative is a liberal who's been mugged. It's a guy who has an opinion about social injustice and all these other things because it makes him feel good and makes him feel, advanced, and makes him feel like he's a caring person. These are good qualities to have. And then you realize that when somebody mugs you, they are threatening your life and may in fact take your life for the contents of your pocket. And then you realize, I didn't put a knife at somebody else's throat for the content of their pockets. And it begins to dawn on you that this whole story is just something that people tell themselves in order to feel good about themselves, the poor, disadvantaged poor. There have been poor, disadvantaged poor in the world, but this isn't that place. So that's it for history and kind of, just sort of social background. Economics is impenetrable. And so since it's so impenetrable, I can give you one book that was the book for me on economics, 2 books that were the books for me on economics. And if you want to write these down, I'd be flattered if you did. But these are the 2 books that changed my life in terms of economics. The first one is called Eat the Rich by P.J. O'Rourke. And Eat the Rich is a book that basically says, P.J., was a giant liberal. P.J. was a radical. P.J. O'Rourke, for a while there in Baltimore, was a student activist for Weather Underground kind of guy, thinking about blowing up buildings. And he goes on to become the editor of National Lampoon. And I read him at National Lampoon when he's the editor. I thought he was hilarious. And then I was such a fan of his writing when he started writing books on politics, and it turns out he became a conservative. I went right with him because P.J. O'Rourke basically wrote about conservatism the way that I felt about things. He's a fast, he loves cars. He's a fast car, hot woman, big gun Republican Party animal. And he made conservatism cool to me. He said, this is about success and happiness, and it's about, humanity and becoming a person and having your own identity, your own apartment, your own car, your own house, doing what you want to do. And it's the liberals who are the squares. And I thought, yeah, man, that's exactly right. But back to Eat the Rich. Eat the Rich is, P.J. traveled the world for Rolling Stone magazine, and that's what made him a conservative. He actually got into the world and saw what's actually going on in places like Mogadishu and other places that suck. So P.J. wrote a book called Eat the Rich, and in Eat the Rich, he takes a look at various social economic models. So he does good capitalism, and he goes to New York and he watches the stock exchange. He does bad capitalism and goes to Albania, where there's no law at all, and everybody's stealing and bargaining and stealing and bargaining. And he looks at good socialism in Sweden and bad socialism in Cuba, and he has a chapter called How to Make Nothing Out of Everything, where he goes, I think it was to Africa, which has got all of these natural resources, and they've got nothing. And then he goes to Hong Kong, how to make everything out of nothing, where they have no natural resources and they're the per capita richest people in the world. And when it gets all said and done, you really come down to this idea of capitalism really fundamentally working. That's one book. Another book is called Whatever Happened to Penny Candy. And it's a little book, and it's written in form of letters to this guy's nephew. And Whatever Happened to Penny Candy is about inflation, and it's about money. It's about how money, it's about what money is. So it's a very remarkable little book in terms of how inflation happens, how bad money chases out good money. It talks about where the word dollar came from. Turns out the word dollar was originally from the word thaler, and thaler was an individual mint that printed money. It was like its own little bank back in Holland, I guess. And because they had such well-run economics in this bank, this sort of state, nation, town, bank combo, the thaler was, of the many competing currencies in the world at the time, was known to be very, very sound. It was sound as a thaler. And the colonies loved it, and they just named it the dollar, and the dollar had been based on, and the thaler had been based on gold standard and high-quality gold, and they didn't do anything, about cheating. For instance, from Whatever Happened to Penny Candy, I learned that the reason they put the little ridges on the edges of quarters and dimes, I always thought they did it so they could identify them by feel, but the reason I forget what the term is, somebody will probably put it in the comment section, there's a technical term for the ridging that goes around on the outer edge of a coin. But they put that there because merchants used to cut coins. They used to just shave off just the slightest little bit of silver, and then they'd keep that silver, they melt it down and make new coins. So they actually were reducing the value of that coin. And from that book, Penny Candy, I also learned that what you have in your pockets today are not coins. And I don't have coins either, because the technical definition of a coin is a disc of metal that can be redeemed for its value. In other words, a coin would be a dollar. A gold dollar would be a coin because you could at one point take the coin and redeem it for $1 worth of gold. It was a literal, here, we're giving you metal in the amount of the metal. What we have now, technically speaking, are tokens, because even the silver quarters aren't silver. They're probably zinc or copper or something like that. So valuable things like that. As far as history, I skipped history. If you have one history book to read, two history books to read, the best fun you'll have is reading The Innocents Abroad by Mark Twain, which is, I think, his best work, the best work of the best American writer. Huck Finn's a much better work in terms of, it's just the greatest American novel, really. But The Innocents Abroad is hilarious and fun. And when you realize that somebody's traveling the world in 1867, he goes to Europe and goes to the Holy Land, you realize how much none of this has changed. It's really a remarkable book. And needless to say, The Civil War by Shelby Foote is the best thing I've ever read in my life. It's a huge trilogy, and I read it every 2 years. I just pick it up and read it again. So that's a good book for history. History, economics, government. Go back to P.J. O'Rourke again for government, a really terrific book. It's called Parliament of Horrors. And what P.J. does in Parliament of Horrors is he shows how the U.S. government works, and he shows how, it's going to be a strange thing to say from a conservative, but he shows how they're doing their best, and that the Parliament of Horrors, you think Parliament of Horrors meaning all the horrors that make up the Congress. But what you find at the very, very end, I mean like the last paragraph of the book, and if it was a novel I wouldn't tell you, I wouldn't give it away, but the reason this book is so good is at the very, very last paragraph of the very last chapter, he finds himself in a town hall meeting voting on an ordinance on somebody else's property that he voted for because it makes his life more convenient, even though it takes away this man's property rights. And that's when he realized that the Parliament of Horrors, we're the whores, that we basically send government out to do things that we couldn't do through persuasion. We send the government out to do things through coercion. And P.J. O'Rourke in that book showed us how it's easier to legislate other people's money than it is to go make your own. And it's an excellent book. And it does tell you, it shows you in great detail how the government works. And it's not a positive look at the government. It just says they're doing their best, and their best is not very good. So anyway, those are the things that I use as my bedrock for punditry. Let's move on. Brian Vose, how much farther do you think we would be, technologically speaking, if we had a truly free society? Would we have stuff like flying cars, space exploration, robots, general science fiction type things if there was not so much money and regulations pumped into green technology? It's not even just the green technology, Brian. That's an excellent question. I think that we would have had our lost future, the Sid Mead future of the Stratosphere Lounge. I think we would have had it without all of this government. Speaking of books, I get a lot of books handed to me just because I'm in the business. And usually they're unreadable. I hate to say it, but they're usually just unreadable. You get exceptions like Mark Levin's books are very readable, but most of them are just not. But I was given a book called Free Market Revolution by my friend Yaron Brook and Don Watkins, both of whom I work with down at PJTV. They're both with the Ayn Rand Institute. And the subtitle of Free Market Revolution is How Ayn Rand's Ideas Can Help Eliminate Big Government, something like that. And when you read that book and you really have an expert take you through how government is in everything and how destructive its presence is in everything, you begin to have a glimmer of what the world would look like without it, a glimmer. And it's remarkable. Just as a small example, I was having this conversation at lunch today. The FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, you ask the American citizen what the Food and Drug Administration does, and they'll tell you it's here to protect the American people and to save lives from bad drugs. But I think you can probably make the case that the FDA has killed thousands, if not millions, of people that might have otherwise been saved by making it take 20 years and billions of dollars for experimental drugs to be finally cleared. I think my theory of people, and certainly your own and Don's theory of people, Ayn Rand's theory of people, and very likely your theory of people, is that people are adults and that adults should be able to make adult decisions. So, using the FDA as an example of government intervention, if a pharmaceutical company has a drug that has just finished animal testing, or maybe it hasn't even finished animal testing, and some doctor tells you you have an inoperative form of pancreatic cancer and you're going to die in 6 weeks. However, Merck has an experimental procedure showing high levels of toxicity. We're seeing some patients go all the way to kidney failure. Some people just poison outright. There may be birth defects downstream. We haven't had a chance to test any of this. But we are finding that in 12% of the cases, it is able to put pancreatic cancer into remission. Are you interested? Yeah, I'm interested. If I've got a terminal disease and somebody's got an experimental drug on the market and it's got a 2% chance or a 1% chance or a 0.5% chance, I'll take a 0.5% over no chance. If for no other reason, so that my final 6 weeks can be filled with some kind of hope and not just filled with, filling out the forms. This is the kind of thing that the government has just run away on. This kind of, it's nice to have drugs tested. It's nice to have an idea of the safety of the drugs by an independent means. But, again, this is me also being falling victim to this idea of government. Because I just finished saying it's nice to have an independent thing testing independently, and it'd be nice if it was more streamlined. But when you take it to its logical conclusion, what Yaron and Don and Ayn Rand are basically saying is, why would you trust the government inspector and not the people that manufacture the drugs? In other words, the drug manufacturers, using this as an example, have an obligation to provide safe drugs. It's not in their interest to kill people. They have lawsuits. They have their entire image goes down the toilet. One of the subtle arguments that they made by their whole anti-licensing position is a subtle argument, and it's an interesting argument, and I think it's got merit. And they're saying just the existence of the FDA means that companies no longer have to build and maintain their reputation, and neither do individuals like physicians or so on in the case of other regulatory agencies. Used to be that if it was completely unregulated, your individual character and reputation would be what would make people feel safe, and that would be something that you would protect zealously. Now, with a regulatory agency, as long as you get the seal of approval, you're over the hump and you don't have to worry about anything beyond that. I don't know. It's a subtle thing, but it's interesting. So yes, as they point out, one of the very one of the, not unregulated, but one of the less regulated sectors of our economy is electronics, because there's not a direct personal harm. It's very hard once you get past the basic, wiring issues. It's tough for computers to actually kill people. So it's a relatively unregulated market. And because it's unregulated, look at the result. The performance doubles every 2 years and the price is half virtually every 2 years. I remember paying $16,000 for a computer to edit on that was a 286 processors, and it had two 1 gigabyte Maxtor Panther drives, and those drives were $6,000 each for 1 gigabyte. And of course, you can go further back and you find even more outrage. So you haven't regulated the tech industry, and the tech industry's gone crazy. The only part of the healthcare industry that's essentially unregulated is cosmetic surgery and LASIK. They're not covered by insurance, which means that the government is not regulating them the way they regulate all the rest of insurance. There are some, it's certainly not unregulated, but it's the most free market of the medical sector. And because it's a pay-as-you-go service that's not covered by insurance, sure enough, the prices and the quality, prices go down, quality goes up, because these guys are in competition. And for cosmetic surgery, if you want to have a breast implant, you have market forces. You can pay top dollar and have the best guy in the business do the best job in the business, or you can pay considerably less and get considerably poorer results. You get to choose. It's like buying a car, right? It's like saying, hey, I'd love to have a Mercedes. I can't afford a Mercedes. I'm going to buy a Honda, used Honda. I'd rather have the Honda than nothing. That's treating people like adults. So yeah, Brian, I think we'd be a lot further along in everything. And I think that as long as people, I think the only duty to the that the government would have in an ideal world like this would be to simply say that they would enforce fraud cases on claims on the part of the manufacturer. In other words, the manufacturer would have a moral obligation to provide accurate information about their product, and the government's entire role would not be to say what's in that information, whether people read it, whether it's good for them or not. I think the only role of the government would be to examine what they're claiming these things do and say, is this a fraudulent claim, yes or no? And I think we'd be in a lot better shape. Now we're going to move on here. I swore I was going to pick up the pace this week. I'm already 2 questions down and half an hour in. The irreplaceable Benjamin Ari DeCraker, seems like he always gets a good question in there. What is your theory on why Obama is still doing so well in the polls despite breaking everything he touches? Is it a cult of personality? It is a cult of personality. But the short answer is the media is simply beyond imagining now. I mean, I knew the media was good for 10 or 15 points back during the election, probably 20 points in 2008. And 10 points on, or I don't know if it was 10 or 15, I did the math on one of the first afterburners I did. You flow 15 points from Obama to McCain, and Obama carries Delaware and D.C., and he loses everything else. But now I think the media bias is worth 40 points. I don't think the American people have any idea how filtered their information is. When the President of the United States can say that the problem is a filmmaker making a movie that's been on YouTube for a couple of months, that all the riots around the world have got nothing to do with him. It's got to do with this film that's being so provocative. And by the way, Mitt Romney said something mean about our embassy right when it was under attack. That's the news story. The story is not that these embassies are under attack and have been, and that these were planned, coordinated 9/11 attacks, that the film in question had been up for a month or two in advance and had really nothing to do with this, but especially that the President of the United States leans on law enforcement to lean on this guy, who by all accounts is a reprehensible guy, but I don't care if he's reprehensible or not. I don't care how good or bad his movie is. He's speaking his mind. Let's bring him in for questioning voluntarily. So it's the media. If the media was not in the tank for this guy, he never would have been elected. If the media wasn't in the tank for the guy, he would have been impeached. And now the media is going to such unbelievable lengths and extremes that 30 points, it's 30 points, Ben. That 30 points may be enough. The fact that Romney's even in the race, given this kind of spin and bias, is unbelievable. But I will tell you this, if there was a robotic news service that basically pulled information and then read the information with essentially no spin and no, this is what happened. Mitt Romney, the embassy was attacked. Ambassador says he has warning. Mitt Romney tweeted this in response to this tweet and just laid the information out without any spin. The Democrats would never win again, and neither would the liberals ever win again, ever. This is what we get. This is what we get for allowing this stuff to happen. If you want to know the trouble we got into, that we're in this kind of trouble now, we're in this kind of trouble because when in 1967 or whatever it was, these radicals overtook the law library at Yale, and they just basically went in there and barricaded themselves in, and the faculty apologized. And when the faculty apologizes in 1967 and says, we are showing solidarity with the students by shutting down an institution of higher learning and barricading themselves in a library and using it as a fortress, when those people were not arrested and prosecuted to the full extent of the law, the troubles began. And now it's the new normal. Now it's, look at Occupy Wall Street, right? They're breaking the law. They break the law every day. What do? Nothing. Why not? Be mean. These kids are out here sitting on the lawn for 5 days or 20 days or 5 hours or whatever, disrupting classes. You give them a warning that you're going to disperse this crowd. They don't listen. You give them another warning. They don't listen. You pepper spray them in the face, which is unpleasant, but no physical sign of it within, 24, 48 hours later. Kids are fine. They're not crippled by the pepper spraying they took. And the country is outraged that this guy could just calmly walk down the line and pepper spray these kids. So the universities, the bad guys, and the people who are disrupting classes and trying to get free tuition and, basically welch on their student loans, they're the good guys because of the media. It's unbelievable. I don't know what to do about it. I know it's heartbreaking to me sometimes. I'll do a video or something and it'll get 25, 30,000 hits. I'm grateful for 30,000 hits, but when you realize the scale of the imbalance, it's the media. The media is good for 30 points, 40 points. That's the answer. Connor Lewis wants to know if Obama can't detain an American for exercising his freedom of speech, then what limits him from detaining anyone else for any reason? How dangerous do you think this power could get if he's reelected? It's catastrophic. I was talking with Jeremy today about milestones. What do milestones look like? If you look back at the loss of freedoms, Nazi Germany or Russia or whatever, you can see milestones. The burning of the Reichstag and Kristallnacht, and probably even more significant in the case of Nazi Germany was the election of Adolf Hitler by popular vote by wide margin, and then the Reichstag, basically the parliament, voting themselves out of existence. These are milestones. And one milestone is something like the National Defense Authorization Act, which means it's already happened. It's not like it might happen. It's already there. The legal framework for the President of the United States to arrest and detain American citizens at his discretion indefinitely without an attorney on American soil, that legal power already exists. And if you think that your Fifth Amendment right protects you against that, I would refer you to the picture of the guy with the towel around his face and his sunglasses on being led into a car who thought he had First Amendment protection rights against being arrested for having his speech violated. It's terrifying. It's terrifying. It's the only word for it. It's terrifying. The legal structure is already in place, and the example is already in place. The Fifth Amendment's already been violated by this stricture. That guy's Fifth Amendment rights were violated on camera. His First Amendment rights were violated on camera. President of the United States got out there and basically said he has no right to do this, and people at MSNBC, same people that defend Piss Christ, taking a crucifix and immersing it in a jar of urine and photographing that and having the government pay for that art and having the government pay for Robert Mapplethorpe and, his insertion of leather whips into various orifices in the male anatomy. This is all art. It's all protected. It's all stuff we have no right being offended over. And unfortunately, they're right. We do have no business being offended over it. We can be offended. We don't have a right not to be offended. If we don't like Mapplethorpe's art, shouldn't go to the museum that day. But none of this is happening. They're all attacking the messenger. The guy, she was asking for it, right? She wore a short skirt down to the bar. And I want to know where Jodie Foster is on this. And I want to know where Steven Spielberg is, and I want to know where Martin Scorsese is, especially Scorsese, who made The Last Temptation of Christ, faced peaceful protest informed us all that this precious, precious right to self-expression is the most precious of our rights and cannot be violated. And I'm sorry if you're offended, but you're just going to have to be offended because my ability to speak my mind trumps your ability to be never offended. And Martin Scorsese is right when he says that. So I want to know where he is now while this guy's being brought in for questioning. I want to know why he's not speaking up. And I want to know if he's willing from this point forward, since he doesn't speak up, so for Scorsese and Spielberg and Oliver Stone and all the rest of people submit their movies to an outrage panel. And if some 7th century Yumani savages have a problem with it, then the movie gets recalled and they get brought in at midnight by armed deputies and they have to answer some questions. And not just 7th century Yemeni savages either. If what they do offends Christians or conservatives, then we should have the right to say this offends us. And then, once again, police cars need to be sent to Martin's house or Steven Spielberg's house or Bill Maher's house, and he needs to be brought in for questioning because he's abused his right to free speech because he's offended us. I mean, seriously, there's no difference here between what I'm proposing and what actually happened, right? No difference at all, none. So I hope they think about it, but they won't. And for the same reason that liberals are liberals. Their religion is their politics, and they have no standards that are independent of their personal, momentary desires. And that's not just my allegation. There's apparently a book called The Righteous Mind, which was written by a liberal psychiatrist or psychologist. And they examined why people make the ethical choices that they make. And this liberal psychologist found that there were 5 different reasons why people would make a decision. And I don't remember them exactly. This is close, but it's not exact, so cut me a break here if you don't mind. But the 5 qualities are something like compassion, equality, sanctity, authority, and loyalty, right? I think those are the 5, something like that. Well, as it turned out, conservatives value all 5 of these more or less equally, and they cluster them all more or less equally, and a violation of any one of these 5 is a real problem for a conservative who at least has high ethical standards. But liberals only value equality and compassion. Sanctity, authority, and loyalty are virtually not on their radar. What that really means is if they think it's good for their outcome and it means breaking election laws, well, then the ends justify the means. Conservatives, speaking for myself, I'd rather lose an election by the law. If we lose fairly by the rules, then I'd rather lose than cheat to win. I have sanctity for respect. I think the rule of law as a concept supersedes any short-term political gain, which is why if somebody came to me and said, Bill, we can win this election for Mitt Romney and we'll have to cheat to do it, you could make the case that the election of Barack Obama may be the end of the country. You could make the case that Barack Obama is cheating and cheated last time. You can make all the cases you want to, but I still wouldn't do it because to me, if you have to cheat to win an election, number one, you no longer believe in anything and your values are gone. And if your values and your honor and your character are gone, you have nothing left. There's that, but there's also the realization that comes from people who have a bit of character that if I have to cheat to win an election, then the wisdom of the people, which has been trying to tell me something, is going to be circumvented. If more people are voting for something, there's a reason why they're doing it, and I need to go to that reason. And cheating and stealing an election deprives me of the feedback I get from the election. But liberals don't have that view. If you could have told them in 2004, or certainly in 2000, if you had to cheat to get George Bush out of office, they would say, well, of course, I'd cheat to get him out of office. Some of these liberal pundits call for people to vote frequently, vote early and often. Yes, I know people are going to say it's cheating, but it doesn't matter. It's only secondary to how important it is to get George Bush out of office. Well, these people have no sanctity. They have no loyalty. They have no character. And authority, meaning rule of law, has no meaning and no weight with them. So that's what you get. Connor, it's horrifying. Yes, it's horrifying that he's got these powers and he's done what he's done. And when he doesn't have to face a re-election and he gets into these, executive order, which is also a form of cheating, the government is set up so that the president has to act through the Congress. And these executive orders are recent innovations that have been gaining more and more power, and they're extra constitutional, they're extra legal, and we're going to see a lot of those, whether he's reelected and if he's not reelected during his lame duck session. So that's that's a problem. Because we have not as much time as usual, I'm going to skip all the Romney stuff. I'm sorry, guys. That's some other stuff I think is more interesting. I've talked about Romney before and the big politics thing, and we'll talk about it again. What else have we got? I like this question from Aunt Jeannie. How do you convince a wonderful, proud, older black man who remembers the hard times for blacks in the South that Obama is not the right black man to get behind? That's an excellent question. The first thing I would say to them is that this is a two-part outrage here. First of all, Barack Obama shared none of those hardships. None of them. He grew up surfing in the most expensive private school in the most expensive state in the Union. Barack Obama sat up smoking doobies in a car on the beach in Hawaii, surfing and goofing off and doing drugs. Barack Obama has had every single door that was ever on the street he was walking down open to him automatically. Barack Obama's never faced hardships of any kind. Barack Obama's had the red carpet laid out for him his entire life, and all you have to do is look at his history to see it. So first of all, Barack Obama has nothing to do with the struggles of blacks in the American South. He has nothing to do with the Civil Rights Act. He didn't pay any dues at all. He didn't pay any dues at all, which is bad. But what is worse is he takes credit for having paid dues. He is basically Barack Obama, and the Civil Rights Movement is like a guy who wears an army uniform and puts on a medal that says either Purple Heart or Congressional Medal of Honor and wants to walk down the street and get the salutes and the admiration of people. So not only did he not serve in the military, but he's also trying to cash in on the glory of the people that did. And that's exactly what Obama is doing with this entire civil rights struggle. He's claiming credit for it. He's claiming that he's the product of it. He's claiming that he's somehow the champion of it. You know, that old story about how his mother and father got, the only reason he's here is because of a march in Selma, Alabama. If it hadn't been for that march in Selma, Alabama, his white mom and his black dad never could have got married, and the miracle of Barack Obama would not be able to stand here before you today. And, of course, the only problem is that the march on Selma occurred 3 or 4 years after Barack Obama's mom and dad met. So he's cashing in on the glory and the hard work and the pain and the sacrifice of the people that he claims to be representing. He wasn't ever a part of that. That's the first thing I'd say to that proud older man. The second thing I'd say to that proud older man is I would ask him to think back about the time when he was a young man and before the Civil Rights Acts had passed. And I would ask him to think back to when he was a child and a young man and ask himself if the policies that the Democratic Party put into place in the mid-'60s that swung so many blacks from Republicans, which they'd been their entire history, to the Democrats, and I'm talking about entitlement programs, handouts, things like affirmative action, things like welfare and all of this soft attitude towards crime and illegitimacy and all this stuff, all this patronizing stuff of treating you like you're not fully human, you're not smart enough to get into college, so we'll lower the scores for you, you're not capable of getting a job because, so we're going to pay you, all this stuff. I'd ask him to think back on the structure, not of the racial oppression, but I'd ask him to think back on the structure of his family and the structure of the black community, the fabric. Was it denim or was it gauze? Because if he's being honest, I'll bet you anything he will say that black culture today is nothing like what it was when he was a young man, when in the turn of the century or early, later than that, in the 20s and 30s, black high school graduation rates for kids that were in high school, it wasn't easy to get into high school, but those who were in high school had a higher graduation rate than those of white students. And I'd ask him to think back about this is a long story, but I'll condense it as much as I can. I'd ask him to think back about the bargain and the deal between Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. The idea was that Booker T. Washington said the answer for the black people is to go back. Basically, he said, go back to your slave owners as paid employees, work your asses off, buy your own farms, get economic freedom first, and then your political rights will follow. Build an economic base where the first generation is farmers, the second generation is plumbers, and the third generation is lawyers. And if you do that, you will own your own businesses, you will have your own networks, you'll have your own economic and political and family structures intact, and that's the answer. Webb Du Bois said, no, go for your political rights now. Make them give it to you. Make them give you the money that they were owed you, and make the white people feel guilty, and take as much as you can using political clout. And Du Bois won. And I'm not sure that that was a big win, because Booker T. Washington was Tuskegee, right? The Tuskegee Institute had a tremendous reputation, academic reputation, a tremendous graduation rate. The Tuskegee Airmen were the best fighter defense force in World War II on the American side. They never lost a bomber. So I would ask him, do you think you made the right choice? I would ask him if Martin Luther King's fundamental vision, all of Martin Luther King's work in the civil rights movement essentially can be boiled down to one sentence spoken by Martin Luther King, and that is, not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. That is, in essence, what he was saying. And ask him to ask himself, do you think that content of your character is more represented by the Republican position or the Democratic position? Because the Democrats are saying that you get these benefits because you're black, and you don't have to live up to his highest standard because you're black. And he will take the country and divide it into tribes, of which being black is one of many tribes. Being a woman is part of that tribe. Being Hispanic is part of that tribe. Being gay is part of the tribes. And ask yourself if the Democratic strategy of sectioning the country into warring tribes is color of your skin, or ask yourself if the Republican idea that black people are just as good as white people, they're just as likely to succeed in college or not succeed in college, they're just as capable of getting an ID to vote as a white person is, that is content of your character. It's not saying that you're automatically evil because you're black, and it's certainly not saying you're automatically good because you're black. When you get right down to it and you ask about the policies, you'll find that Republicans respect and admire and revere Martin Luther King, who by all accounts was a Republican. His daughter said he was a Republican. He never announced, of course, because he couldn't announce. He was above politics, and he knew he needed to be. But you can't tell me that a man who is the philosophical descendant of Frederick Douglass, who said that the Republican Party is the anchor of the black man's hopes, you can't tell me that a man like Martin Luther King, who watched those hoses being turned on people and knew that those fire hoses were being turned on them by people like Lester Maddox and Bull Connor and George Wallace, 3 Democrats, and that it was Democratic politicians throughout the entire South that put the Jim Crow laws into effect, that guy is not a Democrat. So I would ask him those things, Aunt Jeannie, and see what he says. And if you do ask him and you get an answer, I'd love to hear it. Ryan Moss would like to know, if you could change a single thing about American culture, what would it be? I think I addressed that earlier. I would spend, I'm not in favor of giant government programs, but I would spend Manhattan Project money, I'd spend Marshall Plan money, and I'd spend Apollo Program money on a way to produce news reports independently of human interaction. I would produce an automatic, robotic news report that was entertaining enough for people to watch. Because frankly, if I could eliminate the media bias in this country, every single thing after that would follow. Education reform would follow, energy drilling would follow, protection of our rights would follow, First Amendment right would be protected, Second Amendment right wouldn't be debated. If there was an unbiased, not a conservative, not a right wing, when there was an unbiased media, if there was an unbiased media in this country, then we would see the will of the people done, and our side would never lose another election. So I would spend whatever money was necessary to do that. I'd spend every dime there was in order to get this media cancer out of our system. Because every single day we watch it get worse and worse and worse. A few people in skyscrapers in New York are determined to tell this country how it's going to behave, and they think they know more about other people, but they don't. I've met these people. These are some of the most small-minded, parochial little people in the world. Their entire experience of their entire lives is confined to an area about a mile square in Lower Manhattan, among a very specific caste of people, among a very specific set of educational backgrounds. They're the most narrow-minded, small-minded, petty, tiny, bitter, envious, terrified, moral pygmies that ever walked the face of the earth, and they control the information flow, and they are determining the course of this country, and it's a coup. So that's what I would do. Mary Lou Mawson wants to know, how do you answer the charge from good people that we're the ones who are being brainwashed, that Fox News viewers are ill-informed, that the Tea Party are greedy? I don't know where to start with these people. Well, Mary Lou, they look at the Tea Party and Fox News as different because it is different. It's different from all the other organs of the media. So take Fox as an example. Fox is conservative media and everything else is liberal. Now, they'll want you to believe that CNN and MSNBC, or certainly CNN, is right square in the middle of American ideological thought. MSNBC may be just slightly to the left, but Fox News is way, way over there to the right, way out in the wings. So you have to ask them why Fox News does so well, because Fox News is actually, if you ask them, if they're big old Democrats, they want to go to the science. So first of all, tell them that's scientifically been proven again and again and again by liberal magazines and liberal study groups that Fox News does provide more balanced reporting than any of these other competing news services. That means they have more opposition viewpoints. The opposition viewpoints are treated better and they're given more airtime than the liberal viewpoints. So number one, statistically, evidentiarily, it is true that Fox is a more balanced news source than the others. But I think the way you really get these people is this. I assume, Mary, you're a conservative like we are. So since you're a conservative, like the rest of us, you get to hear the liberal viewpoint every single day. It's drummed into your head every single day, not just in the news. You get it in movies, you get it in TV shows, you get the gay agenda, you get the black agenda, you get the women's agenda, you get all the agendas every single day, and you have to hear it and be exposed to it. So what I would do to them is I would say, if we are the ones that brainwashed, if we conservatives are brainwashed, why don't we have a little parlor game? And why don't we pick a subject, and why don't I tell you what I think you believe and you tell me what you think I believe? And what we'll find out real quickly in the space of a half an hour is that you know much, 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 much more about their opinions than they know about your opinions. And then when you finally get a chance to point out to them that everything that they know about you is just not true because you've been there, then you can say to them, so who's doing the brainwashing here? I have a much better idea of what you know and believe than you do about what I believe. Where did that knowledge come from? Came from a better access to better information. I have more available information on what you think because I hear your sides of the arguments all the time. You never hear our sides of the argument, which is why you can't tell me what the Tea Party is about. That's why you can't tell me what somebody's position is about. You can't tell me about what Rush said because you never listen to Rush. I listen to The Daily Show because I have to. Right? Because it's everywhere. And I think if you had that conversation with them, you'd be able to prove to them in fairly short order you knew more about their side than they know about yours, which means somebody's being brainwashed with one side of the information, and it's not you. Picking up the pace here, have you noticed? Mark McConnell. Today is my birthday. Happy birthday, Mark. I've always enjoyed that. The whole idea of birthdays, I think, is just an awesome thing. Not every society celebrates them. Most of them do, but happy birthday. And when my family asked what I wanted, I shouted the Stratosphere Lounge. How sweet is that? They guess I know I'm crazy like a fox. Now looking forward to another great show. My question is, what's in store for us after Obama loses the election when he has 8 weeks for mischief? Well, first of all, your lips to God's ears, that he does lose the election. We're going to see some amazing things if that happens. And they're not going to be pleasant things. The entire idea of a lame duck presidency is a pretty dangerous idea. It's constrained by certain things. The idea, of course, is that if the president realizes that he's lost the election in November and the next president is legally sworn in January, it used to be March. If the new president is sworn in January, then the president between November through all of November, basically all of December and half of January, most of January, can do whatever he wants to because he's not constrained by re-election or anything. And before the modern era, there was very little that a president could do in terms of damage. But now with executive orders, there's a lot he can do. The good thing about an executive order, even though they're completely extra-constitutional, is that if you issue Executive Order 6921 that says that everybody shall have to wear a pointy red hat on the street under penalty of death, then Mitt Romney, when he's elected and sworn in, inaugurated, can then say, well, Presidential Executive Order 6293 says that you no longer have to wear a pointy red hat on the street. So whatever can be done by executive order, my understanding is, can be undone by executive order. But the problem is some of these executive orders and things can put into place things that are very hard to undo. In other words, you can establish bureaucracies, you can set certain regulatory standards, you can tinker around with things and put stuff into the machine. And as you know, if you take a handful of sand and throw it into a well-oiled machine, that's one act, and then the act of getting every single grain of sand out of those gears is another act, and the other act is not nearly as easy to perform as the first one is. So there's an awful lot of damage he can do. I heard some speculation, I think it was from Jeremy. It was a really profound insight, and I just think it's a good example of the kind of thinking that people would be doing in a case like this. And Jeremy's line of reasoning was basically this. He thinks that the Israelis are ready to attack the Iranian nuclear installations and won't do it before the election because they fear that if they do, it could rally the country behind the president, and they think that the re-election of Barack Obama is second only barely to Iran having a nuclear weapon. So they don't want to help Obama get reelected, so they're going to hold off on the strike. If Obama wins, that a strike on the Iranian reactor could happen the next morning, because once he wins, what happens after that is irrelevant. But if he loses, then Jeremy's idea would be that the Israelis would hold the strike until maybe the first week in January, or the second week, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 days before Romney is nominated. Before he's inaugurated. Because if they do that, it means that the strike occurs on the Obama watch. It's not a stain on the Romney presidency. It's not the first thing out of the gate for the Romney presidency. It happens under the Obama administration. But it happens with such a short time that there's really very little that outgoing Obama could do if he had 3 or 4 days or 5, 6, 7 days. There's not a lot you can do with something as massive as the U.S. military. You got to kind of push some of these things and get some momentum going. So that might be good. But yeah, I think we'll see some amazing things. And if he gets reelected, we'll see what we would have seen during a lame duck presidency over the course of 4 years, because as he said many times, once he's reelected and he doesn't have to face the voters again, he'll have a lot more flexibility. And what he's done already, having to face the voters with taking people in and bringing them in for questioning and violating their Fifth and First Amendment rights, and the media being his sword and shield, it's not impressive already. So it makes you kind of wonder what's going to happen if he doesn't have the constraints of a re-election on him, and it scares the living daylights out of me. So if you have any Ron Paul friends or libertarian friends or any other friends who are worried about that and they're going to make a statement, you might want to tell them this is probably not the year to make the statement, because if they decide to make a statement by voting for the Republican who is not the Republican nominee, namely, Ron Paul, if we lose the election because of the Paul bots or libertarians or anything, then we'll have no one to blame but ourselves for this. And I hope that is not the case. So that's it. Happy birthday, Mark. Michael Baker, Bill, are there any non-sci-fi movies that fit into your top 10? If so, could you name them, please? I'd be happy to. I didn't prepare this list, so I just have to kind of go through my head here. Citizen Kane is a brilliant movie, and everybody picks Citizen Kane, so if you were a hipster, you wouldn't pick it because it's so mainstream, but it's just a superb film. Paths of Glory is a movie made by Stanley Kubrick. In his early career, it's about three French soldiers who were selected out of the entire French army to be executed for murder, for cowardice, based on a true story. It's a really, really great film. I just think what just comes into my mind when I really liked Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? That's a Coen Brothers film. The first Coen Brothers film ever was called Blood Simple. Hardly anybody sees Blood Simple. That's a great movie. Fargo's a great movie. The Scorsese, De Niro, Pesci triplets are terrific. Raging Bull's a fantastic film. Goodfellas is a fantastic film, and Casinos is a good film. Let's see. I liked Close Encounters of the Third Kind very, very much, but that's sci-fi, so that doesn't count. Let me think. It's funny, isn't it? It's kind of like trying to remember a joke. There's so many movies out there that I actually really do like. And then I remember thinking, wow, it'd be really easy to do this, but I got to tell you, I'm just drawing some blanks here. Big Lebowski. Yeah, The Big Lebowski is a great movie. Just about everything that the Coens do is great. Raising Arizona is great. Godfather series, yeah, thanks, Charles. That's another set of great movies. So I'm pretty open-minded about these things. There's a lot of, and by the way, when I was in college, I was a theater major, but I was also a film studies guy. And when I was in film studies, I saw a lot of movies. I saw all the classics. I saw Bicycle Thief. I saw Andalusian Dog. I saw Jules and Jim. I saw the Swedish films. I saw Seventh Seal and Wild Strawberries, and then I got into Bertolucci and weird movies like 1900 and Luna. Somebody just said The Right Stuff. Fantastic film. I love that film. L.A. Confidential was pretty good. Usual Suspects was terrific. Tombstone. Here, look at you guys. You're right there. Tombstone is a great film. It's not a good film. I'm sorry. It's not a great film. It's nothing like a great film. It's just a fun film. I really enjoy that. Healy, of course. Needless to say, Skydash, the classic with Ben Affleck and who just doesn't love Jennifer Lopez? Is certainly the most talented and sweet and kind and generous and humble person who ever walked the face of the earth. Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, I can't believe I didn't think of that first, because it is kind of sci-fi, it's kind of fantasy. Raiders of the Lost Ark is the perfect movie. Raiders of the Lost Ark is the perfect movie. It is absolutely perfectly constructed. And if you were to look at the Hollywood film script format and how Hollywood movies are made and American movies are made, Raiders of the Lost Ark is simply a perfect movie. Everything that gets set up gets paid off. Everything that they pay off in the end gets set up. The arc of the character is terrific. The love interest is really interesting. The aide, the John Rhys Davies character is great. The villains are great. The scenes, the scenarios, fresh and different. It was just fantastic. Fantastic. That's got to be one of my all-time favorites. One of the best films ever made. The original style. Again, we're trying to get off of sci-fi. So those are a few. I really didn't like Full Metal Jacket, but R. Lee Ermey in the locker room during the training session in the first half of that movie, R. Lee Ermey is just unbelievable. In fact, this might help just to wrap this thought up, because rather than thinking of favorite movies, I can think of my favorite sequences, my favorite movie moments. Somebody mentioned Rear Window, and I was looking at a picture of Grace Kelly last night. I just thought, my God, that has to be the best-looking woman who's ever been born on this earth. And Capra, It's a Wonderful Life, everybody knows. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, everybody knows. But the Capra film that really got me was Meet John Doe. Meet John Doe just reduced me to tears, and I was a teenager in college, and Meet John Doe just laid me low. But sequences, you can think about great sequences, and the helicopter attack sequence in Apocalypse Now is a fantastic sequence. The docking sequence in 2001: A Space Odyssey is a brilliant sequence. Here's one I forgot. Glengarry Glen Ross. Alec Baldwin is a giant D-bag, but Alec Baldwin's 7 minutes in Glengarry Glen Ross are some of the best moments ever committed to film. And so there are neat little moments, little sequences, and occasionally you'll see something like that where it's like, oh man, this is, the movie's okay, or maybe this movie's not so great, but there's this little sequence that's just brilliant. Anyway, moving on. We're going to get a little late, and I gotta be done by 7:30 at the latest, and hopefully maybe a little bit earlier. Nathan Spear, you mentioned your friend Jeremy Boring. How do you spell it? Boring. Can you tell us more about him and how you met? I was at a lunch. We had some Hollywood conservatives having a lunch, and I was there with Andrew Breitbart, and Jeremy Boring came in, and we sit around a table and just sort of went around and introduced ourselves. I was sitting next to Breitbart. I said my little piece. Breitbart said his piece. Went around the room. Jeremy was on the far corner, and he said his piece, and while he was talking, I leaned over to Breitbart and I said, this is that guy over there is probably the third brightest guy in the room. Probably the third brightest guy in the room, Breitbart. And we just immediately hit it off. We got pulled together to work on some Obama stuff early on. He had a gun catalog open on his desk in his apartment. I said, "Is this yours?" And he said, "Yeah." And he was a little defensive because, in Los Angeles with actors and writers, if somebody said, "Oh, yeah, is that a gun catalog you have on your?" Yeah. So, "Oh, you have a gun?" He said, "Yeah, I got a 9mm and a revolver." I said, "I got a .45. And then we just really hit it off. And he comes from a very, very different background than me. I was, like I said, was a lot more liberal. Jeremy's from a little town called Slayton, Texas, just outside of Lubbock. Very conservative background. He's a Christian pastor. He has his own home church, which I've been to several times. And Jeremy had the most intelligent things to say about religion I'd ever heard, the most intelligent things to say about a lot of things I've ever heard. I listened to a lot of radio when I was in Florida, a lot of, when I lived in Gainesville, listened to a lot of, Christian radio down there, and a lot of that is really pretty not good stuff. I mean, really pretty, I don't know, just Southern evangelical radio can turn off a lot of people. But Jeremy talked about the gospel in such a way that it was just very compelling and very powerful and very new. But really, Jeremy's the only friend I've had who I can talk to about politics or just about anything, where I just learn something pretty much every day. I mean, he's really sharp guy. He had the idea for Declaration Entertainment. He went out and wrote and directed The Arroyo, which is literally in the next room now as we're doing this show. They are building the last of the credit sequences. All the sound design is done, visual effects are done, the mix is done, the audio work is done, the movie's finished. They've got the movie's score is already in, and the score under the credits is in, and they're putting the last of the credits in, and by the end of this evening, unless I miss my guess, by the end of this evening, it will be finished. Somebody had asked if there's a chance it's going to get in theaters. Doesn't seem likely, but it'll certainly be released to Declaration Entertainment members, and there's going to be a DVD release, and they'll be finding some ways to promote it and stuff. So that's Jeremy in Declaration. He's a smart guy, and he's a good guy. He's been a tremendous friend to me, and along with my friend Dana and Fritz, are really the three friends I have. And all of those people give me tremendous counsel, and I need a lot of counsel. And they provide it more or less uncomplainingly, which is a big job to do for no pay. And I think we'll probably just end on this one because I've been asked this a couple times before. I know we're going a little short tonight, but the last two have been 2 hours, and the one before that was, I think, maybe almost 2.5, almost 3. So that was Nathan Spear, by the way, asking about Jeremy Boring, and Michael Baker asking about the movies. Eric Wright, I'm going to end with your question here. What does your typical day, week look like, Bill? Well, generally speaking, in the beginning of the day, I go first thing. I go out in the morning and report to my secret underground Zeppelin base, where we fuel the vehicle with fresh hydrogen, and I put on my red satin smoking jacket and my fez, and I pour myself a small sifter of brandy, and I grab my copy of Chaucer and my pipe, and I sit in my overstuffed red leather chair with the brass studs, and we begin to ascend over Los Angeles, and then I slowly cruise over the city with my giant brass binoculars and my big enormous brass ear funnels plugged into my ears, try to listen to what's going on the ground down below, and then I'll pull out a leather megaphone and scream down at the people, "You're all a bunch of idiots. You're voting for the wrong people." Then I retract the solar sails and the stealth Zeppelin lands, and we descend in the elevator to my underground complex where my command center is, and that's where I do most of my serious work. Through, you would think through computers, but actually I use a series of pressurized tubes. It's a series of tubes, and I put little messages in little things and close the hatch and pull a lever and pneumatically get center on the world. And that's basically how I do it. Actually, when I was a TV editor, I had this thought today, and was working, in an edit bay from, it's Hollywood, right? So from 10 in the morning till 6, 7 at night. I thought, man, if I ever had my own hours, I'd get so much done. Now I have my own hours, I don't get as much done as I would like. My weekly schedule is probably easier to predict than my daily schedule. I have my days and nights pretty much to myself. Monday, I have a noon conference call for the shoot that we're going to have on Trifecta on Tuesday. So usually over the weekend, and certainly by Monday morning, I have to have some idea what I'm going to be doing for Trifecta. And then at noon on Mondays, we all call into the same number. Steve Green, Scott Ott, and Matt Orr, the producer. And we sit there and pitch our ideas. We don't really pitch them because it's very, very rare that they get rejected. We just basically say, here's what I want to do. So we do that. Tuesday morning, I have to be in PJTV, which is down south of the airport, down in El Segundo, for Trifecta, which we tape from 10 to 11. Every other week, I have to have an afterburner written, which we usually do on a Tuesday or Wednesday. On the week opposite the afterburners, I have a week with Clavin, and that's usually on a Thursday afternoon. So that kind of takes, given travel times in LA and the traffic, that's kind of the middle of the day. But most of the time, I come into the office and I work on things like afterburner scripts and firewall scripts and other things that I'm working on. And the honest fact is that I spend almost all of my day reading almost exclusively on the internet. I just I'm trying to get around as far as I can to suck up enough information, which I'm suddenly tired. I try to what I try to do. The best way I've described this, I think, at least to my own satisfaction, is that I often feel like Dorothy in the opening minutes of The Wizard of Oz, where I'm standing in this tornado of information, which is circling my head at high speed, and look, there goes a cow, and oh, there's a lady on a bicycle, and here's a dog. And I try to get exposed to as much information as I can on the internet, and I'll see things that interest me, and then I'll just sort of put a mental pin in them. I don't ever write notes. I've never written notes for an afterburner. I've never done any of those things from notes or from any kind of prepared stuff. I think about them and think about them and think about them, and then when I'm ready to write them, I sit and write them. Now, the actual writing of a firewall or an afterburner usually takes me about an hour. That's the writing of it. But it doesn't take me an hour to think about it. I think about these things all day. I think about them all day. My recreation is usually flying, although we had the plane down for a little bit of maintenance, the airplane that Dana Schwartzwalter and I own. And hey, Data. And it's a very lightly loaded airplane. It's a beautiful airplane. It's a gorgeous airplane, very safe and kind of slow. But the problem with that airplane is it's a very lightly loaded wing, and it's not got a lot of power. In fact, it's an underpowered airplane. So there are entire months where really flying the airplane is just not any fun. The summer months where the temperature here at Van Nuys Airport is routinely 100 plus, and it's often 110 plus. In that kind of heat underneath that glass, plexi canopy, it gets very, very hot. The performance of the wing is not as good in hot weather. The performance of the engine is not as good in hot weather, and these are marginal engine anyway. So I haven't done a lot of flying lately. I like going to movies when I can, and every time I go to a movie, I always tell myself I should go to a movie more often, because when I do, it makes me want to get back in and make more movies. But no, it's been pretty much just an average day, and the social life kind of comes and goes. And when you're active in a social life, you're actually dating somebody, then your nights are a little more busy. And I've been seeing somebody recently, and it's a lot. It's not as dense a dating. It's not as dense a dating matrix as I'm used to. She's very busy. I'm very busy, and it's a little more sporadic, I guess. But I'm having fun, and really, honestly, like all of you, I just want this election to be over. I want it to be over with a win, but one way or another, I want it to be over, because when it is over, I'm going to take a little bit of a break, and I'm going to go right into the movies. I think the movies are where you reach people. Yeah, Bart Bartholomew says JATO, Bill. We'll put a little JATO bottle. JATO stands for Jet Assisted Takeoff, and these are rockets that you put on the side of large airplanes like, let's see, they put them on the side. I think they put them on B-52s. I know they put them on B-47s for a while. and they put them on the side of like C-130 Hercules, and you start the takeoff roll, and then you light these rockets, and the thing just goes whoa like that. That JATO bottle would push us through our red line in the first tenth of a second, and the rest of the time would carry us to the side of the mountain where we'd be splashed. I'll be happy when this is over and get to doing the movies, because as we've said, politics is downstream of culture, and I want to get back into the film business. I'll keep doing these forever. I'll keep the Facebook page forever. I'll keep doing firewalls and things like Stratosphere Lounge forever. There's a world where I might do a talk show. I'd like that, I think, quite a lot. But honestly, I would really like to be free of the sense that, I'm somehow responsible for what's going to happen in November. I just feel like I need to do my best to make sure this doesn't happen, and I'm really worried about it. I'm more worried now than I was a couple weeks or months ago, only because I thought I'd seen the media at not at their worst, because I don't think there's a bottom to them morally, but I thought it was at the end of their reach. But it seems like no, they're just going to just come out and do whatever it takes to get their 30 points and get over the line. So I don't know. I'll be happy when November comes and goes. But I'll tell you one thing. If we lose this thing, I am not going to do a Michael Moore and disappear for 4 days. We lose this thing or win the thing, I'm going to have a firewall out there that morning. And if we lose, then it'll be time for us to really buck up. And if we lose, that's when the work that we're going to be doing is going to be more important than ever. Because if we lose, we are going to have a plan to figure out what's going to be on the other side of this thing. Because if he wins a re-election, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough, and somebody's going to have to step up, and that means me and all the rest of you as well. So at 7:20, I've got a couple things to report. Sorry if this one seemed a little mechanical. I'm a little tired today, and like I say, I have just a ton of work to do tonight. So, but hopefully you got something out of it. I always get something out of it. I always enjoy answering these questions. I always am just blown away by the quality of the questions, and the quality of the questions is a reflection of the quality of the fans, and the quality of the fans presumably is a reflection of the quality of the author. So if that's true, then I'm the most successful writer in history. I've never encountered better people than the people I've met through you guys. So once again, the standard close. Thanks for the car and the apartment and the job and the office. You all make that all possible, and I do have big plans about what we're going to do after this election, one way or another, and they don't involve staying on this planet. So thanks again for everything. Thanks again for the Facebook fans. I say it every week. It bears repeating every week. I don't get to answer many of the comments I see, but I read every single one of them. So if you've sent me a link or if you've sent me something, I know I've just got so much to do, but I read them, and I'm very, very grateful. I'm grateful for all of the likes, and if you think somebody would like the kind of stuff we do, if you have anybody out there that you can think of who you'd like to send a personal appeal to, the bigger that like number is, the more reach we have. And when we push out a video, the more people we can push it out to, the more people see it. And people seeing it is why I do it. So that would be great. So this is the end of Stratosphere Lounge episode 15. We'll be back next Wednesday, barring problems. And feels like it might be time to do another theme night. I really had such a fun time with the theme night before. Thanks again for all the thanks. And we'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.